The second half of life offers a profound opportunity to reshape the architecture of the mind, not through rigid discipline, but through a fundamental shift in perception. Society often frames aging as an inevitable slide into cognitive decline, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy where fear accelerates the very deterioration one hopes to avoid. This narrative ignores the immense plasticity of the brain and its responsiveness to the energy of intention and higher awareness. By aligning daily habits with a philosophy of purpose and connection, the individual can unlock a reservoir of vitality that protects memory and cognitive sharpness. This journey moves beyond simple brain games or supplements to address the spiritual and psychological roots of mental longevity. The path ahead reveals how to trick the brain into loving the habits that sustain it by anchoring them in a sense of divine purpose rather than duty. The alignment of intention and neuroplasticity, the concept of aging, often carries a heavy psychological burden that manifests physically in the neural pathways of the brain. When an individual views the passing of years as a series of losses, the brain responds by prioritizing survival mechanisms that limit growth and regeneration. Dyer suggests that the power of intention acts as a field of energy that shapes reality, including the biological reality of the body and mind. This perspective aligns with modern neuroscience, which demonstrates that the brain remains malleable and capable of forming new connections well into the later decades of life. A mindset rooted in expansion rather than contraction signals the nervous system to remain open, curious, and adaptable. The brain does not distinguish between a physical threat and a psychological fear of irrelevance, releasing stress hormones in both cases that damage the hippocampus, the center of memory. Changing the internal dialogue requires a conscious effort to observe thoughts without judgment. The habit of self-correction becomes a vital tool in preserving cognitive function. Instead of lamenting a momentary lapse in memory as a sign of decline, the individual can choose to view it as a simple signal to slow down and pay attention. This shift prevents the cortisol spike associated with anxiety, protecting the delicate neural structures responsible for recall. The philosophy of intention teaches that what one focuses on expands, meaning that a focus on mental clarity will generate more clarity. This is not merely wishful thinking, but a physiological directive that guides the allocation of metabolic resources within the brain. The neural networks strengthen where attention flows, making the quality of attention the most critical factor in healthy aging. It is natural to feel a certain resistance when trying to adopt new mental habits after decades of established patterns. The brain prefers the path of least resistance, which is often the familiar rut of worry or resignation. Recognizing this resistance as a biological default rather than a personal failure allows the individual to approach change with compassion. This gentle awareness prevents the discouragement that often derails efforts to improve health and vitality. By accepting that the brain seeks safety in the known, the person can gradually introduce new ways of thinking without triggering an internal battle. Small, consistent shifts in perspective eventually build a new foundation for how the mind interacts with the world. A practical application of this principle involves the morning routine. Instead of waking up with a mental checklist of potential problems or aches, the individual sets a deliberate intention for the day. This might involve a few moments of silence to visualize the day unfolding with ease and clarity. During breakfast, rather than rushing through the meal while distracted by news, the person practices full sensory engagement with the food. This act of mindfulness stimulates the prefrontal cortex and trains the brain to remain present. Such simple adjustments do not require extra time, but demand a different quality of presence. Over weeks, this practice reduces the background noise of anxiety that often interferes with short-term memory encoding. However, it is important to acknowledge that positive intention alone cannot override severe organic disease or neglect of physical needs. A spiritual approach to aging does not negate the necessity of nutrition, movement, and medical care. There are limitations to how much the mind can influence matter if the biological substrate is fundamentally compromised. The danger lies in using spiritual concepts to bypass necessary practical actions or to deny the reality of a diagnosis. True alignment involves caring for the vessel of the body with the same reverence one holds for the spirit. The integration of high-level intention with grounded physical care creates the optimal environment for the brain to thrive. The social environment also plays a crucial role in reinforcing or dismantling the intention of vitality. Surrounded by peers who constantly verbalize their decline, an individual faces a significant challenge in maintaining a different frequency. The mirror neurons in the brain naturally mimic the emotional states and behaviors of those nearby. Protecting one's memory involves curating a social circle that values growth, learning, and positivity. This does not mean abandoning old friends, but rather setting boundaries around conversations that reinforce helplessness. The energy of the group can lift the individual or drag them down, influencing the very chemistry of the brain. Ultimately, the goal is to move from a state of striving to a state of allowing. The struggle to remember often blocks the flow of information, whereas a relaxed state of receptivity opens the gates of recall. Wayne Dyer emphasizes that the ego is the source of much suffering and tension, while the higher self operates in a realm of peace and knowing. By identifying less with the ego's need for perfection and more with the observer behind the thoughts, the pressure to perform diminishes. This reduction in performance anxiety paradoxically improves performance. The brain functions most efficiently when it is not being strangled by the fear of making a mistake. What narrative about my age am I willing to rewrite today? The frequency of gratitude and cognitive retention gratitude is often relegated to the realm of emotion, yet it serves as a potent cognitive enhancer that fundamentally alters how the brain processes information. When a mind scans the environment for things to appreciate, it activates the reticular activating system, a network of neurons that filters sensory input. This filter determines what information reaches conscious awareness and what gets discarded. A brain trained to look for the good is a brain that is actively engaged, alert, and receptive to new details. Wayne Dyer speaks of the need to match the frequency of the source, which is pure love and appreciation. In biological terms, this state creates a neurochemical environment rich in dopamine and serotonin, neurotransmitters that are essential for learning and memory consolidation. The habit of appreciation transforms the mundane into the miraculous, keeping the brain in a state of wonder rather than boredom. Boredom is a silent killer of cognitive ability, leading to the atrophy of neural connections. By finding novelty in the ordinary, the individual tricks the brain into remaining plastic and active. This does not require seeking out grand adventures, but rather shifting the lens through which daily life is viewed. A walk in the neighborhood becomes a botanical study, a conversation becomes a deep dive into human nature, and a meal becomes a sensory exploration. This depth of processing ensures that memories are encoded with rich associative tags, making them easier to retrieve later. In the midst of building these habits, there comes a crucial realization that changes the entire trajectory of aging. The pursuit of memory protection ceases to be a battle against time and transforms into a celebration of life. The individual stops trying to hold on to the past and begins to fully inhabit the present moment. This shift releases the immense energy that was previously bound up in resistance and fear. The memory improves not because the person is fighting harder to remember, but because they're finally fully present to experience the event in the first place. This is the midpoint payoff where the struggle dissolves into a way of being. Applied to the learning of a new skill, such as a language or an instrument, appreciation changes the dynamic from frustration to play. Instead of berating oneself for slow progress, the learner appreciates the opportunity to stretch the mind. The focus shifts from the outcome of mastery to the joy of the process. A person sitting at a piano might focus on the resonance of a single chord, feeling the vibration and hearing the harmonics. This deep sensory appreciation anchors the auditory memory more effectively than rote repetition ever could. The emotional tagging of the experience as joyful ensures that the brain prioritizes the storage of this information. There is a counterintuitive risk in the pursuit of constant positivity, often referred to as spiritual bypassing or toxic positivity. It is unhelpful to suppress genuine grief, frustration, or anger under a veneer of forced gratitude. Unprocessed negative emotions create a backlog of stress that impairs cognitive function more than honest expression would. The practice of appreciation must be authentic and capable of coexisting with a full spectrum of human emotion. It is possible to feel sadness about a loss while simultaneously appreciating the support of a friend. True cognitive resilience comes from emotional agility, not emotional rigidity. The vocabulary used in daily speech also reflects and reinforces the state of the brain. Words carry energy, and a vocabulary limited to complaints and limitations restricts the mind's horizon. Expanding one's vocabulary to include words of possibility, beauty, and precision challenges the language centers of the brain. Wayne Dyer often highlighted the importance of I am statements, noting that they define the individual's reality. Saying I am forgetful instructs the brain to fulfill that identity. Replacing this with I am becoming more attentive sets a new directive for neural organization. The language we use is the software code for our biological hardware. Sleep acts as the ultimate act of surrender and appreciation for the body's need to restore itself. During deep sleep, the glymphatic system cleanses the brain of metabolic waste products that accumulate during the day. Viewing sleep not as a waste of time, but as a sacred reunion with the source allows the individual to prioritize rest without guilt. Creating a ritual of appreciation before bed, reviewing the gifts of the day, primes the brain for positive dream states and efficient memory consolidation. The transition from waking to sleeping becomes a bridge to the higher self, rather than a crash into unconsciousness. Where can I find beauty in this moment to wake up my mind? Detachment from outcome and stress reduction, the desperate grasping for specific outcomes, is a primary source of chronic stress, which acts as a neurotoxin to the aging brain. High levels of cortisol, sustained over time, physically shrink the hippocampus and degrade the prefrontal cortex. Wayne Dyer teaches the profound spiritual lesson of detachment, which involves setting an intention and then releasing the need to control how it manifests. In the context of memory, this means trusting the mind's ability to recall without forcing it. The tip of the tongue phenomenon often persists because the anxiety of not remembering blocks the neural pathway. When the individual detaches and moves on, the name or fact often surfaces effortlessly moments later. Detachment does not imply indifference or a lack of caring, but rather a liberation from the tyranny of the ego's timeline. The ego demands immediate gratification and validation, whereas the spirit operates in a state of timelessness. By adopting the perspective of the observer, the individual can watch their own cognitive processes without identifying with them. If a detail is forgotten, the observer notes it without judgment, preventing the spiral of self-criticism. This psychological distance reduces the inflammatory response in the body and brain. It creates a buffer zone where the mind can relax, and a relaxed mind is an efficient mind. The mechanism of memory retrieval is highly sensitive to emotional states. When an individual creates a high-stakes environment around their memory performance, the brain shifts into a fight-or-flight mode. In this mode, resources are diverted away from higher-order thinking and towards immediate survival functions. By practicing detachment, the person signals to the nervous system that there is no immediate threat. This keeps the higher brain centers online and accessible. The practice involves catching the rising panic when memory fails and consciously choosing to breathe and release the grasping. It is a training of the nervous system as much as the mind. Consider a social scenario where one forgets the name of an acquaintance. The typical reaction is embarrassment, followed by a frantic internal search and a flurry of apologies. This reaction reinforces the neural pathway of anxiety associated with social interactions. A detached approach involves acknowledging the lapse with humor and grace, perhaps saying, "The name has momentarily escaped me, but it will return." This response maintains social connection and keeps the brain in a safe, receptive state. It reframes the moment from a failure to a human experience, reducing the social stress that contributes to cognitive decline. It is important to distinguish healthy detachment from apathy or resignation. Apathy is a lack of life force, a withdrawal from participation that accelerates aging. Detachment is high involvement with low attachment to the result. The individual remains fully engaged in the conversation, the book, or the project, but their self-worth is not hinged on perfect execution. The balance lies in caring deeply about the activity while accepting the natural fluctuations in performance. Losing the spark of interest is dangerous. Losing the fear of failure is liberating. One reflects on the vast amount of mental energy consumed by trying to control the uncontrollable. The energy reclaimed from worry can be redirected toward creative endeavors and learning. The brain thrives on creativity, which requires a looseness and a willingness to venture into the unknown. Wayne Dyer often spoke of being independent of the good opinion of others. This independence is vital for memory health because the fear of judgment is a massive cognitive load. When the mind is free from the burden of impression management, it has more processing power available for the task at hand. Forgiveness acts as a powerful form of cognitive decluttering, essential for maintaining a clear mind. Holding on to grievances requires active mental effort and sustains a low-level stress response. The brain loops over past hurts, strengthening those negative pathways and crowding out new learning. Letting go of the past, as Dyer advocates, is not just a spiritual act, but a neurological necessity. It frees up the bandwidth of the brain, allowing the present moment to be encoded with clarity. A mind cluttered with past resentments has little room for new joy or new facts. What outcome am I trying to force that I could simply trust instead? Synthesis of spirit and biology for lifelong vitality, the journey toward a memory-protecting lifestyle culminates in the seamless integration of spiritual wisdom and biological stewardship. The dichotomy between the mind and the body dissolves, revealing a single, unified system that responds to love, purpose, and care. The trick to loving these habits lies in reframing them not as chores to prevent decline, but as rituals that honor the divinity within. When the choice to eat nutrient-dense food or to meditate is driven by self-love rather than fear of death, the habit becomes sustainable and effortless. This alignment creates a new baseline for life after 50, characterized by energy, clarity, and a deep sense of peace. The long-term neuroprotection offered by this mindset extends beyond the preservation of facts and names. It preserves the essence of the person, their humor, their insight, and their ability to connect. The brain, treated with respect and fueled by high-frequency intentions, maintains its structural integrity. Neurogenesis, the birth of new neurons, continues to occur in brains that are stimulated by novelty and shielded from chronic stress. The individual becomes a testament to the possibility of aging with grace, proving that the later years can be a time of harvest rather than decay. Wayne Dyer's assertion that we are spiritual beings having a human experience reminds us that the mind is a tool of the spirit, and the spirit is ageless. A vision of the future self serves as a powerful magnet, pulling the individual toward healthy choices. Imagine a version of yourself 10 or 20 years from now, vibrant, engaged, and sharing wisdom with the next generation. This visualization is not a fantasy, but a blueprint that the subconscious mind works to fulfill. When faced with a choice between a sedentary afternoon or a stimulating walk, the connection to this future self provides the gentle nudge needed to choose vitality. The abstract concept of health becomes a concrete relationship with one's own potential. There will be inevitable physical changes, and not every day will be peak performance. The body has its seasons, and the energy levels will fluctuate. The counterexample to perfectionism is the acceptance of these natural rhythms without catastrophic thinking. If a day is foggy or low energy, it is treated with compassion, not panic. This resilience prevents a bad day from becoming a bad week or a bad life. The acceptance of impermanence, paradoxically, allows for greater stability in the long run. Ultimately, the promise of this journey is a mind that remains a faithful servant to the heart. The fear of the common enemy, the fading self, is replaced by a curiosity about the unfolding self. The habits of nutrition, movement, sleep, and meditation are no longer items on a to-do list, but expressions of gratitude for the gift of life. The shift in perception is complete when the individual realizes that they are not their memory, but the consciousness that observes it. In this space of awareness, there is no loss, only eternal becoming. Who does the world need me to be in this chapter of my life?